We're back here at Coffee with April with another Q&A session. So first of all, we're really happy that you guys are sending in questions. Please send in more of those. I mean, whoever you are, wherever you are, amateur, pro, whatever you do in coffee, if you have anything you want to hear our perspective or take on, then feel free to just send in questions, right? This time, the question is from Joshua Clark, and again I'm quoting this so that we all know what's going on. How different is your espresso roast from your filter roasts in terms of overall time and end temperature? What are you looking to achieve in different roast profiles, assuming the same green coffee? So let's do the quick answer first. I'm sure we have a pretty longer discussion in front of us. So how different is your espresso roast from your filter roast in terms of overall time and end temperature? So as a rule, the end temperature is very similar. There's very few coffees that we roast that has a different end temperature in general. End temperature is something that very much correlates with color. Again, can change a bit depending on green coffee. We hate to generalize, but as a general rule, end temperature stays very similar regardless of coffee and roast approach. What is the difference in overall time? Well, here's where it kind of gets interesting. In general, our espresso roasts are faster total time with a longer time after crack, but with the same end temperature as our filter profiles. So why will we do that? Well, we're doing that because we want to increase the solubility in our coffee. And roasting something faster is an efficient way to break down the solubility to be able to extract more of our coffee, right? And also, to some extent, change around the acid compounds of the coffee. So I want to not make this about an omni-roast kind of thing, but it kind of will be. I mean, it's hard to discuss this without discussing omni-roast. Let's first, for the record, state that I have no opinion about whether omni-roast is a good or a bad thing. I don't care about omni-roast as a concept or not omni-roast as a concept. What we do here at April is that we roast coffee in a way that we believe is tasting good, and we believe is generating brew methods that taste really good, right? What I can say, just for the argument around omni-roast, again, no interest in omni-roast, but a part that I'm missing in the discussion is that people seem to think that omni-roast is a style of roasting, which it's not. Omni-roast is a style of brewing, whereas you take the same beans and you brew them in multiple different ways, right? Saying that omni-roasting is a style of roasting doesn't make any sense, because if you list all of the roasteries that you know that do omni-roast, look at profiles, look at end temperatures, look at total times, look at color tracking, you're going to notice very quickly that all of these roasters are producing very different roasts. Then someone is still calling it omni-roasting or the best way to roast a coffee or whatever that is, which is amazing. I'm really happy that someone has found the way they want to roast coffee. Again, no issues with that. It's just people that want to make this into a roasting discussion, I think it becomes a really stupid conversation, because the reality is that it's not, because omni-roasting is not a specific way of roasting. Omni-roasting is deciding I want to brew the same roasted coffee in multiple different ways, right? And I think that's kind of an important thing for the discussion. Now, we are deciding not to take one batch and brew that in multiple different ways. So we believe that if I take our filter profile and we brew that as filter and we brew that espresso, I can agree with the fact that we can make a tasty version of each. Sure. But we're not in the business of doing tasty coffee at April here. We're in the business of trying to figure out how we can make coffee much more than tasty, right? It's about finding not just a good, okay, decent version of a coffee. It's about finding the best fucking version of a coffee you can, right? And if you're looking at the different brew methods that we have working with currently, and let's say we categorize it as filter and espresso, which is a very simplistic way to categorize it, but let's say that's how we're doing it, then there's some very fundamental basic differences within these two brew methods that very clearly shows you that if you look at roasting in a way that you want to alter acidity structure, sugar structure, and solubility structure, and you look at the fact that when you extract an espresso, you do that in a super compressed basket with a very limited water flow, with a shitload of pressure, versus when you extract a filter coffee, you can do that with a ground distribution that is very different, with almost no pressure, with a few exceptions depending on brew method, but basically very little pressure. It's pretty clear that from a roasting perspective, there's no such thing as one profile that would be optimized for both versions. I mean, that's just basic science, that we don't even have to make it more complicated than that. Again, I'm super happy that people have found roast approaches that taste then amazing on both profiles. I say go for it. I mean, in the end of the day, we start coffee roasteries because we want to roast coffee the way that we like. That goes for all of us, and I think it's very important to respect the fact that that's what we're going for, right? I'm not roasting coffee to make everyone else happy. We're roasting coffee as an expression of what we believe is important here at April, and other people do the same for their companies. And I think that's an amazing process, right? I just want us, when we have conversations about this, to have a slightly smarter conversation about it, because again, I mean, saying that omni-roasting is this one way of roasting doesn't make any sense. It's one way of brewing, right? Whereas we're deciding that one batch is going to be brewed in multiple ways. And that's, to be fair, really just a logistical issue for most people, where it's cutting cost in production. Again, nothing wrong with that. I mean, I can drink a lot of coffees from other roasteries that do omni-roast, and I definitely appreciate a lot of those coffees. I'm not saying it doesn't work as a concept. And again, we get this question a lot, where a lot of people want to brew our coffee in different ways. Or some people are buying our filter coffee for espresso, and so on and so on. I think that's, super fun. It's, if you find a way to make the coffee taste the way you want to, that's an amazing thing, right? What I can say is that in the terms of espresso roasting, I mean, we still get these kind of conversations where, well, espresso needs to be darker, espresso needs to be longer roasted, espresso needs to be this and this and this. And I mean, we're way beyond that. That's a really old school way to look at things. Nothing wrong with it, but that's not how we approach our espresso, right? So I think for most people, if you were looking at the curves that we're actually pushing, you would realize that our espresso coffee would still qualify as lighter as most other people filter coffee, right? And the more we roast, and again, based on the systems you roast on, you can do a lot with that, right? So we're roasting on the lowering behind me, and I mean, for example, our profiles, all of our coffees will have a lighter color than almost all of the coffees you try from, for example, a drum roaster, because the transfer of energy is different, and we don't have a super warm drum that is pushing conductivity to your beans and coloring the outside. So it becomes a very different style of roasting, which enable us to get more flavor intense, better balance of structured coffees. What I can say, and again, we were straying a bit away from the question here, but what I can say from an espresso perspective is that I honestly can't remember the last time I had a tasty espresso served in a coffee shop. Somewhere, anywhere. There's always exceptions. I mean, you go to the Tim Enderbø shop in Oslo and you get amazed every single time over how fucking delicious the coffee is. I had actually, I should say this just for the record, I had actually an amazing, there's this guy from Coffee Collective that is competing in the upcoming Danish Barista Championship, and he served me his competition coffee, which is one of their kind of regular coffees. That was really good, really strong, right? But apart from that, I mean, it's very, very hard to get a really tasty espresso. It almost never happens in a coffee shop because of the extractions, because of the roast, because of a lot of different things, right? But yeah, back to the roast concept. So what we've experiments with traditionally as well, again, total roast time in general shorter for espresso than filter, and temperatures the same. Time after crack longer on the espresso roasts. When I say longer, we're talking 5 to 10 seconds. Someone is going to ask me about total percentage development time, and the fact that we're still discussing percentage in development time is also, I mean, again, it's time for us to have smarter conversations about coffee, whereas your development time is going to have a huge difference in percentage depending on your total roast time, right? So saying that you should have a fixed development time, or that a percentage in development time is relevant in any case, I would argue is just a waste of time for conversation as well. But if anyone wants a random number, let's say we're between 10 to 14%. Again, if you're roasting based on percentage on total development, I would recommend to stop doing that. So, I mean, there are a few differences for sure. What I can say in general is that we're roasting both on filter and espresso. We have, again, not darker coffees in terms of color tracking or end temperatures, but we're roasting longer now than what we've done before. Traditionally in my roasting career, I had a time where I was roasting very, very fast, and that's going to reference 7 to 8 minutes in total roast time. And today for me, a fast roast will be about 9:55-ish up until 10, whereas a long roast can be up to 13. So we're definitely roasting a lot longer than before. Also changing the total batch size. So traditionally working with smaller batch sizes as well. Smaller batch sizes, faster roast makes a lot of sense. I mean, these days I'm doing larger batch sizes, longer roast, which also makes a lot of sense, right? It's just a compensation for the mass. But still trying to push my end temperatures down, making the coffee lighter and lighter and lighter. Again, always staying away from what people call underdevelopment. We don't want that. We want a sweet structure, want a balanced structured. But in the end of the day, I mean, back to it, espresso filter, it's two vastly different brew methods. I think that's the important thing to understand. And I think that people are still confused and lost in this kind of idea that espresso traditionally have been something very different than what it is today. But I mean, just look at the fact that you have a shitload of pressure, restricted flow rate, or restricted capacity of flow rate versus almost no pressure and whatever flow rate you want to have, right? I mean, it's a huge difference here, right? And I also want it to be a difference. I don't want my espresso to taste like a filter coffee. I have filter coffee for that, right? I think that's an important fundamental difference. Do I want my espresso to be a heavy, bitter, low high concentrated, strong punch in the face? Definitely not. Do I want it to be a light, no-bodied, super sour, unstructured kind of water-out espresso? No, I don't. I think, again, espresso is in this no man's land now where people are exploring it, which is amazing, and I think that's a good thing. But there's very, very few people that have found a way to brew espresso that correlates well with the way they've chosen to roast that coffee, whether it's omni-roast, filter roast, espresso, whatever the fuck you call it. There's very, very few people, and I think we can, if we're objectively and a bit honest on what we're tasting around the world, it's very, very difficult. I think espresso is one of those things we really need to dig into and understand and learn and figure out better than what we have today. I mean, You shouldn't have to. I mean, last year, for example, in Amsterdam backstage, World Barista, we tried some really amazing espresso, right? Pretty fantastic. But you want to be able to have a really tasty espresso coffee also in a coffee shop, right? And I think that's something we really need to work on. Filter coffees, I think a lot of people are at least better calibrated now than what we've been in the past. So it's an improvement. So yeah, that's a pretty long answer on a relatively short question, but I know you guys are gonna go nuts on this Omni thing because some coffee nerds like to do that, and I mean, go for it. Just know that I'm really uninterested in having that conversation. It's about making tasty coffee, whatever way you make that happen, you know, go for it. Innovation is amazing. New styles of brewing, pressurizing water, whatever you do, that's also amazing. It's super fun. We should explore that. Just be objective and honest about what you're actually tasting in the cup. Plus, I mean, let's have smart discussions about stuff. Let's look at omni-roast for what it actually is. And at the moment, the only definition of omni-roast that fits is one batch of roasted coffee brewed in the same way, right? There's not a concept of roasting style based on that. I'm not sure it has to be. It doesn't really matter. I just want us to kind of understand what we're all doing a bit better. So again, if you guys have any questions, any comments, write them down here. If you want to give me shit for not liking omni-roast, then I mean, let's skip that for another day. I'm really uninterested in the discussion. But thank you guys for watching. Thank you for asking the question as well, Joshua. I hope this was helpful for you. If it wasn't, then you know, write a comment, give me some shit, and I'll make another one for you. Thank you guys.